Alrighty. So, welcome to everyone who's on live and to everyone who watches the replay. So, my name is Mitch Gainey. Most of you know me who are on the live, but I'm an evidence-based EFT practitioner and trainer. My background is in counseling. I kind of cut my teeth in the counseling world, working with young people experiencing homelessness and people from refugee and asylum seeker backgrounds who specifically had gone through a torture experience. So that was kind of my to use an appropriate word, my baptism into into this work and working with trauma. And I've been doing that for the last, 14 years or so, and I've been an evidence-based EFT trainer for the last 7, I think. It's been a while. And I also have my own experience of growing up in kind of fundamentalist religion and very hardcore Pentecostal religion, and have had to go through my own journey of working through not just kind of reshaping my beliefs or the whole deconstruction stuff, if we want to use that phrase, but also how those experiences were living in my body and causing panic attacks. And I tend to work with a number of clients who have come from religious backgrounds. Some have no trauma from that, which is amazing, and find a lot of resource in that. And they work with a number of people who also have had a lot of very challenging experiences from high control religions, and different church beliefs. Even sometimes people who have come from fairly nominal mainstream religion experiences. It's still around other humans and with other people, so there tends to be pairings of not so great experiences within that, because we're dealing with humans, we're dealing with complex relationships. So what I want to go through today is just a very brief overview of how we might define religious trauma, as it's this kind of emerging field and concept, as more and more people are kind of going, oh, hold on a second. Sometimes this thing doesn't land too well in the body. And then a brief overview of what clinical EFT is and how we might be able to apply it in this area. So I'm just going to share my screen, get my slides up. Alrighty, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. I know technology's working in my favor. Fantastic. So I call this EFT for religious and spiritual trauma, because one, I wanted to be a little bit more global in the sense of we're not just talking about one particular religion. We're talking about all kind of high control fundamentalist religion, and also spiritual trauma, because we go through life, we encounter different spiritual traditions. If we think of religion and spirituality, if you've grown up in the evangelical church, you would have heard this many times. It's not about religion, it's about relationship. In our relating to life, whether that includes a being that we call God or just some form of spiritual framework, life lets you down, and life can be quite hurtful. And how we wrestle with that can be quite traumatic. So just wanted to make it a little bit more broader. But when we talk about spiritual religious trauma, we've got this amazing quote from J.S. Park, who I believe is a chaplain in hospitals. Spiritual trauma is when my body is a house and my house is haunted, and I believe that God is the ghost. Harmful theology and abuse teaches me that God is haunting me and I deserve the curse. And I like this quote because when we grow up in, or when our clients grow up in these kind of high control religions where there's this all-powerful God who's very concerned about what you're doing, and he sees everything, it can feel like a bit of a haunting. And no matter how far you leave your base church or your base religion, that can often still remain in the body. It's like a haunting, and you might go and try different things, but those beliefs and those experiences often wired into us at a very young age. It's almost a part of you, and we can believe that God is against us, that God is working against us. There might be some remnants of a belief that we're going to burn in hell forever, or just a fear that persists in life just because of various experiences. So when we talk about religious trauma, so we've got a form of emotional and psychological abuse perpetrated by a religious leader or group, and or with a religious or spiritual component, usually involving coercion or control. So think of pastors, priests, swamis and gurus who, because of their standing as representatives of the divine, and I mean, I'm sure we can all think of stories of either where there's been high control over finances, relationships, or there's been coercion into unhealthy sexual relationships or experiences, and just controlling thought process. Religious trauma is the condition experienced by people who are struggling with leaving an authoritarian, dogmatic religion and coping with the damage of indoctrination. So when you've been told that this base, this community is the one true community, that they're the in group, everyone else is either against you, against the divine order, demonic, and if you leave this group or challenge this group, then you are at risk of eternal damnation, or it proves to you that you have demons in you. That's a pretty intense thing to hear, particularly if you're hearing that from a young age and you don't quite have the ability to maybe critique that or separate yourself from it as easily, because also all of your familial and social ties are in that space. There may be we may be going through the shattering of a personally meaningful faith and or breaking away from a controlling community and lifestyle. So I also think it's important to realize that religious trauma can be from or experienced by someone who has a really strong, robust faith that is otherwise relatively healthy, but for whatever reason, a life event occurs and they feel like they've been abandoned by God. Or something really horrific happened in their church and they can't quite reconcile it with their beliefs around how God should work or does work. And then this horrific thing has happened. That can be very traumatic as well. And this idea of religious trauma is very much related to PTSD and complex PTSD, because often it's not so much the one-off event that occurs, it's many events over a lifetime. It's the repetition of harmful teaching and dogma, and all of the social interactions that happen within faith communities that can be really, really damaging as well. So it can show up cognitively as confusion, difficult with decision making because you don't know how to make a decision because someone else always made it for you, or you believed there was a specific will of God that you had to try and discern and figure out. And if you got it wrong, there'd be consequences. Can be dissociative and some identity confusion. Well, who am I outside of this? Who am I without these beliefs? Can be affective or emotional, affective, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, suicide ideation, grief, guilt, loneliness. Functional, so people aren't sleeping, people developing eating disorders, nightmares, sexual dysfunctions, substance abuse, dermatization, so it starts to show up as pain and chronic pain in the body. And then there's also the social aspect of this as well. So rupture of family and social network, employment issues, struggling to keep you on a job, financial stress because, again, you never learned how to handle your money. Someone else always did it for you. So maybe you have a compulsion to give it away. Problems acculturating into society. So particularly like the real hardcore high control religions where you had to be separate, and everyone else was demonic or evil. Imagine then leaving your community and going out into the big bad world and thinking, how the heck do I navigate all of this? Like, what's safe? what's okay for me to do? Can I trust this person or not? And interpersonal dysfunction. The other thing I might add to this is I have seen a trend of people who come from these kind of high control religions. They kind of go through a period of being really anti, and then they can sometimes swing into these, uh, I guess the term is new age communities that almost repeat the same patterns, but they've just kind of got a different veneer to them, which I think is interesting when we think of about people's compulsions to repeat trauma patterns. So I find that an interesting thing to watch, particularly on the social medias. So authoritarianism coupled with toxic theology, which is received and reinforced through church, school, and home, can result in suppression of normal childhood development. So you never actually get a chance to grow up and have a normal experience. I remember growing up, my parents are pretty normal human beings. And, we were still part of some interesting church experiences. Not so much from my parents, but more so from my church community. There was I needed to grow up. I had to be very serious. I couldn't engage with what people my age were doing because I had to be different. And I had to hold myself to a higher standard. On some level, that probably saved me from a bunch of grief that I could have got myself into. But it also meant that I did miss out on some really normal milestones because I didn't know how to do it. And I was taught that I shouldn't be involving myself in any of those things. Damage to normal thinking and feeling abilities. You can develop quite a strong external locus of control. So I have no real agency over my life. There's always some external force acting upon me, and I just have to submit to it because if I try and challenge it, then I'm resisting the will of God. Literally, in some communities, and I was part of some of these communities as well, you had to ask your pastor's permission to pretty much do anything. You had to ask permission to not be at church on Sunday because you had something else on. You had to get their permission of who you would date and marry, moving, all of these types of things. So knowledge is revealed, not discovered. So there's this idea that there's either the knowledge comes from the pulpit or wherever, or knowledge has to come through some form of revelation, and it's not just a natural discovery of human experience. And obviously, something that most people associate with the church in kind of the wider culture at the moment is physical and sexual abuse, patriarchal power. So there's often very unhealthy sexual views, which tend to focus more so on women than it does on men. And punishment used for discipline. I'm not saying anything about how we raise our kids, but excessive punishment and excessive force, and this idea of purity culture. Again, I'm not speaking of a conscious, deliberate sexual ethic around abstinence or anything like that, or choosing that for oneself, or choosing to wait till marriage. I'm also talking about an enforced, unhealthy policing of people's bodies and sexual experiences, coupled with a lot of shame around that. And often then linking that to demonic influences and stuff rather than just very basic biological things that we could be looking at. So the severity of religious trauma ranges and depends on a number of factors. So persons most at risk of this trauma are people who were raised in their religion. So you kind of didn't choose it for yourself at some point, you were raised in it. Again, I'm not saying that that is a bad thing in and of itself, but it increases the risk because of just how our frameworks and worldviews are laid down and given to us at an early age. So it can be harder to separate from it. If we're sheltered from the rest of the world, so those very exclusive communities, the people who were very sincere and personally involved, so the people who were 110% in, 100% on fire for Jesus or whoever, and a lot of their identity was wrapped up in, I might say, in the religion and the form and function and community of the religion itself, and those from a very controlling form of the religion. So I think it's important to always understand that religious expression does exist on a spectrum. There are very healthy expressions of religious belief and devotion, and there are very unhealthy expressions of religious form and devotion as well. We only have to look at the world at the moment to see how damaging religious ideology or the veneer of religious ideology can be. And I think it's also important to look through history and go, and people of religious persuasions did a lot of really good stuff in the world. Which, comes to this question, is all religion bad? No. It can be a source of comfort, compassion, community, and inspiration. You look at the commonality of the golden rule across most faiths and religions. And we know that spiritual and religious practice, such as prayer, meditation, and chanting, can shape the brains, in positive ways. And there's also this emerging field of neurotheology. So how does our theology shape our brain, which is really, really exciting stuff for me. But then also that taps into, okay, well, if I devote myself to this particular religious practice, such as centering prayer, they've even done studies on people speaking in tongues, all forms of stuff. How does that shape the brain? What benefits does that give? Purely on a biophysical, emotional, psychological level, because obviously brain scans can't tell you what's happening beyond that. So I do want to just clarify that not all religion is bad. And I think if you're working with clients that have religious trauma, you also have to really be open to that spectrum, and allow that some of your clients, and maybe a lot of your clients, will want to keep a form of faith. And so the goal of working with religious trauma is not to eradicate belief or to tell someone that they have to separate from healthy expressions, because that might not be your jam. It's really to give them the healthiest expression that they can find, or if they are choosing to walk away completely, that we're dealing with that in the body so that they can walk away a healthy person and go on whatever their learning journey and process is. Again, clinical EFT, which I'll get a little bit more into, is essentially a stress relief tool. When I'm working with someone with religious trauma, I'm not teaching or preaching or telling them what I believe. I'm merely helping them work with where they're at and seeing what emerges from there. So assessment tools that we can use in this area, one that I find really helpful is Kosh's 2022 Spiritual Harm and Abuse Screener. You can just Google that and it will come up. The Leaving the Fold Workbook by Winnell is a really helpful one. It gives lots of different tools and exercises people can work through. It's quite cognitive, so it's not moving in the somatic space or the energy psychology space like EFT is. I think it's really important when you're working in religious trauma to do ACE assessments, so adverse childhood experiences, because there's generally a few. And again, because often religion and family are so tied together, often parents or grandparents might bring the family into religion after a trauma as well. So it's just important, I think, to look into that as well. Obviously, looking at their personal religious history, their parents' relationship to religion, because often a lot of the trauma in religious, I don't know why I said this, but a lot of the trauma in religious trauma, maybe the religious trauma, is actually the trauma between families. It's the breakdown of relationship there. It's the breakdown of my family can't accept that I am this way or that I believe this now. And yeah, or even, I've worked with parents who were told that they had to reject their children, and the trauma of going through that, and the conflict internally there. So I said family history, and significant relationships. so partners. So what happens if you're in a multi-faith relationship, or what if you marry someone and then the beliefs change and that causes conflict between you and the partner? How do you deal with that? What if a partner leaves you because they either find religion or lose religion? And also religious figures, pastors, priests, bishops, popes, imams, rabbis, gurus. Some of them can be amazing life affirming individuals, and some of them can intentionally or unintentionally cause a lot of distress. So you kind of want to be mapping out these in relationship to this person. And I also think it's an interesting exploration to look at the client's history with God. However they understand that, I tend to borrow the Quaker phrase, that which we call God. What's the client's history with that? Like, did they understand and perceive themselves as having had a personal relationship with that? Does some part of them believe that there is a God, but he was never interested in them? For those of us who have come from the Pentecostal backgrounds where people are shaking, rattling, and rolling and speaking in tongues, and you might be sitting there going, well, nothing's happening to me, so what's wrong with me? God's not interested in me. That in and of itself can be traumatic for someone. So all things that we want to explore. How do they perceive their relationship to God? So moving into just understanding of what clinical EFT is. So just a brief disclaimer. So I'm not going to read all of this out, but basically EFT does have a lot of research behind it, but it is still considered experimental in nature, although it is gaining more and more scientific support. It's currently with the American Psych Association being assessed for being evidence-based for PTSD and trauma. But there's a whole bunch of research, which I'll go through, but just putting this up here. So when we talk about EFT, because there's two EFTs, there's emotional, it's gone out of my head, emotional freedom therapy, I think it's called. We're talking about emotional freedom techniques. So it's often what's called tapping, or sometimes we refer to it as psychological acupuncture. So you may have seen a lot of, if you're on the interwebs, you're on the socials, people tapping on their face while essentially repeating positive affirmations. That is a form of tapping, which us in the clinical space just refer to as social media tapping. It's not the clinical version that has been tested and tested and tested in clinical trials. So when we talk about clinical EFT or evidence-based EFT, we're talking about the one that has a lot of study behind it and brain scans and all of that stuff. There are many hybrids, but none of them have been thoroughly tested like clinical EFT has. So here is just some data from a study that was done in 2018, it was published in 2018, where they did an hour of group tapping, group clinical EFT with people, and then tested a whole bunch of markers with them. So they were able to see a 37% reduction in cortisol. That was repeated a few years later, and it was something about 46%. So even just an hour of tapping was able to reduce cortisol in the body by a significant amount. Obviously, less cortisol, less stress. Immune system markers up 113%, reported pain down 57%, anxiety down 40%, depression down 35%, PTSD symptoms in just one session down 32%, reported happiness up 31%, blood pressure down 8%. And a lot of the research from Dr. Peter Stapleton, who was my teacher, was around food cravings. And so they're able to see food cravings down 74%. So it's pretty impressive business for a fairly simple technique, and can have quite profound impacts on someone's life. I'll I'll go a little bit more into how it works, but just a very brief overview of how to do EFT. So EFT it's essentially a combination of cognitive and somatic therapies. So the cognitive side is that you're dealing with thoughts and beliefs, and you're using elements of exposure therapy through essentially thinking about the issue. So when I think about this issue, I'm noticing how my body responds. I'm noticing the stress response in my body, and then I'm intervening at the body level, so on the brain and nervous system level, through using the tapping. So I'll go into that bit a little bit more later. So how we do it, essentially, our client comes to us with a problem. They come to us with a level of distress. In the example on here, they've got a fear of heights. But for those of you watching this webinar, your client is coming to you because they have distress around the topic of religion. Maybe they're stressed in trying to figure it out. Maybe they've got stressful experiences that have happened, events that happen, or they get panicked every time religion is mentioned. Anytime they go past a church, their body goes into a stress response. Any conversation with their parents leads into a stress response. Now, there's only so much work we can do cognitively with that. There's only so much cognitive reframing and trying to shift beliefs that are going to change the bodily response, which is where trauma is. So what EFT does is they come to us with a problem. On a very basic level, you rate their discomfort from 0 to 10, 0 being no distress, 10 being complete distress when they think about the problem now. You then come up with a setup statement. This is the cognitive exposure element. So in this example that we've got on the screen here, even though I am scared of heights, except I feel this way, you then tap on the acupressure points, which are seen over here, and you basically just stay with the feeling of tapping. You go through the process, you get your client to take a breath, and you re-rate their SUD, essentially. So 0 to 10, how intense is it when you think about it now? You keep doing that until essentially their SUD is down to 0. That is the basic principle of how EFT, the function of it works. And sorry guys, just a message popped up on my screen. So that's the very basic principle. The client comes to you with a problem, you ask them to rate it 0 to 10. You then do a setup statement. Even though I have this problem, even though every time I walk past a church, I have a panic attack, I can accept myself anyway. You then keep their exposure to it by repeating a reminder phrase, walking past the church, walking past the church, walking past the church, walking past the church, walking past the church. Take a breath. So now when you think about walking past the church, how intense is it for you right now, 0 to 10? Say they were at a 7 before, it's dropped to 3. You just repeat the process. It's a similar principle to EMDR, but instead of using the eye movements, we're using tapping on these acupressure points. So what can be really helpful and a really basic tool that you can use right now and you can use with your clients right now is simply what we call tap and breathe. So tap and breathe is a way that you simply just tap on these spots when a client starts to abreact or a stress response comes up. You can just tap and breathe, and you will notice and watch that they start to down-regulate, that the nervous system begins to slow down, and more breath comes into the body, more clarity comes into the eyes, into the thinking, because you're interrupting and managing the stress response, which then enables you to either go further with being specific in your tapping, or if you're using more talk therapy, you can use this to bring the client down so that they can continue to process. So all you do is you tap on those points while taking gentle breaths. We sometimes refer to this as tapping first aid because we can do it as soon as the client starts to get distressed. It's also really good for you as the practitioner because it helps you stay calm and connected as well. So we're going to have just a bit of a practice of this at the moment. So I'm going to invite you just to feel your feet on the ground for a moment. And feel your bum in the chair. Good to just kind of sense where you are. And I'm just going to get you to follow me. So you're just going to take in a slow, gentle breath through the nose, out through the mouth. You're going to come up to the eyebrow point. It's just at the beginning of your eyebrow. And we're going to take in another slow breath. I'm going to come to the side of the eye. Under the eye. You can use one or two hands. If you need to, you can kind of look around the room. Again, this is just another cue to the brain that you're actually safe. There's no harm happening to you right now. Under the chin point, so just the crease of the chin. And down to the collarbone point. You're just right on the collarbone. If you kind of use your paws, you'll get the general area. Under the arm. And up to the head point. So if you wanted, you could keep going, doing a few rounds of that. You'll notice the more that you do that, and if you do it with clients and you say, just focus on the breath, just feel your feet on the ground, just notice the tapping, just staying here with me, you're doing really good, that their nervous system will begin to regulate. That you will literally see their brain come back online a little bit more. And then you can go further. Because when we're working with trauma, we're not so much working with the cognitions, at least in this modality. We're not so concerned about the content. What we're concerned about is when they think about the content, as they are bringing their cognitive awareness to an issue, what happens in the body. And so our main goal is to keep them safe in the body and to help the body regulate and to process the stress. So I can see a comment in the chat from Swanee saying this has reminders of EMDR, the repetitive nature of the tapping during negative cognition until it decreases whilst thinking about the positive. So yeah, it does have a very strong relationship to EMDR. EFT focuses primarily on the negative and then allows the positive or the more resourced states to emerge organically. So whereas in EMDR, there's more of a deliberate, at least my understanding, there's more of a deliberate weaving in of the positive. Clinical EFT in and of itself does not do so much of that positive weaving in. What we tend to notice is as we deal with the negative cognitions and somatic experiences or the unpleasant or distressing somatic experiences, that the stress comes off the nervous system, therefore comes off the brain, then more resources are available for the prefrontal lobes. Social brain comes back online, and the client will organically reframe or experience a cognitive shift. And from there, we might sit with those positive reframes and somatic states. And you might do tap and breathe, but in pure clinical EFT, obviously there's variations and creative things that we do in the moment. We're less concerned about weaving in the positive, although it does have its place. So I encourage you with tap and breathe, just play with that maybe for the next week. Do 2 minutes of tap and breathe, do a few rounds of tap and breathe in between your sessions with clients. Anytime you notice yourself getting a bit distressed, and just notice what happens. What we find is that if you can do it yourself and you can get your clients just to do that one practice of tap and breathe consistently over a few weeks, that their base stress levels actually come down and that they tend to be more grounded and regulated overall. Again, you can also use that tool at the beginning of a session. So I tend to do 2 or 3 minutes of just tap and breathe as a way to settle the client and get them present. And then if I am using something predominantly like talk therapy, if the client starts to get dysregulated, we might just pause and just do some tap and breathe, just to be with that experience, see the downregulation, so then the client isn't getting overwhelmed by distress. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Let's talk about how EFT works. So EFT works on a similar idea to acupuncture and acupressure, essentially. So a 10-year research program at the Harvard Medical School using fMRI and other imaging devices to investigate the effects of stimulating acupuncture or acupressure points found that certain points send signals to the amygdala, kind of like the smoke detector or the stress center of the brain. I know that's a very simplified way of talking about the amygdala, and other parts of the limbic system, which reduced arousal almost immediately. So based on these imaging studies, people came to the conclusion that tapping on these acupressure points will send activating as well as deactivating signals to the pertinent brain areas in a manner that corresponds with therapeutic change. So the kind of working understanding of EFT is that by tapping on these points, which are traditional acupuncture points and acupressure points, where there tends to be bundles of nerves and also something called the primovascular system. By tapping on these acupuncture points, it's believed that it sends to specific brain areas activating and deactivating signals that are beneficial in relation to the psychological issues being addressed. So basically, as you're tapping, signals get sent up to the brain via the nervous system, via the primovascular system, due to something called piezoelectricity, or electricity caused by pressure, that essentially downregulates, deactivates the amygdala response, which allows other regions of the brain, primarily the hippocampus, to reorganize and process. Because under intense stress, the amygdala floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol and a bunch of other things, which inhibits the hippocampus and inhibits the brain from fully processing. Because it is essentially a primitive stress response happening, what should happen is after a stressful event that is short term, which is essentially what our stress response is designed for or evolved for. We want to be careful with our language when we're working with religious trauma. It's supposed to be short term, and then we're supposed to find safety and connection and process through shaking, breathing, sleeping, connection. What happens in modern age is that we actually never finish the stress response because it's so chronic. What happens in CPTSD and religious trauma is that the whole thing is stressful, and so it never gets a chance to turn off. And there is some interesting studies. I will have to find the exact one and send it out to you just to make sure that I am not telling you lies. But there has been some studies, I believe, that indicate or show that people who have been exposed to high control fundamentalist religion over a long period of time have an enlarged amygdala. So their stress response is kind of in overdrive, which makes sense when the whole world is scary and you you have the potential of pissing off the divine judge and ruler who could send you to hell for eternity. That's kind of stressful. And so the amygdala is bigger in those brains, apparently, and the prefrontal cortex is a little bit smaller. Interesting to look at. I'll try and find it and send that out. So the generation of electrical signals by tapping them is explained by mechanosensory transduction, or as I said, piezoelectricity. Dr. Peter Stapleton has done some interesting brain studies, brain scans, where you can see the activation and deactivation of the brain after sessions of EFT, which shows decreased arousal after EFT, which is pretty amazing. There's also just way too much anecdotal evidence now to say that this doesn't work, because it does. So there's 125 clinical trials. 123 of those showed statistically significant improvement on mental health or related measures, and it exceeded what might be expected from placebo. 69, I think these have gone up by now, actually. 69 random controlled trials, 56 clinical trials with no comparison condition. 81 did follow-up investigation. 79 found that benefits were sustained post-intervention. A lot of the research has been around PTSD as well, which shows that 10 sessions is effective to essentially make someone not clinically have PTSD anymore, so they don't meet the markers for clinical post-traumatic stress disorder in just 10 sessions. And those results were maintained at the 6 and 12-month mark as well. So again, if we can apply this in the context of religious trauma, then we could have quite profound impacts on our client's life. So I'll open up to questions in just a moment. But one of the other things I want to say about EFT, and where I think it is different to something like EMDR, is my experience of clients who have done EMDR. Some have said it's amazing and it changed their life for the better. It's not been uncommon for me to hear that EMDR was super intense, and some people found it too intense. EFT, for whatever reason, tends to be a bit more gentle, but as effective. And the other thing with EFT is you're teaching it to your client. So yes, in the beginning, I'm the therapist and I'm kind of taking my client through it. But in that, I'm also educating them how to use EFT in between my sessions, in between our sessions, so that they can work through stuff, that they have a tool that they can immediately use upon the onset of distress. So a lot more traction can be gained, I think, because clients will end up tapping in between our sessions as well, and slowly working through stuff. So I just want to kind of open up to any questions that people might have, if any. And if not, that's okay.
No, that's great, Mitch. I just wanted to add to, I think it's important to encourage people to use it on their own, more for emotional regulation, particularly if you're facilitating a trauma process, because they want to be safe and be held. So I'm fairly strong on that when I'm teaching it to clients, and I use tap and breathe. I love it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jane.
And I just quickly, I popped in the chat box. Are these slides available?
I will have to think about that, but I can maybe make a version that will be available.
Yeah, no, that's okay, because I'm just presenting soon and I just wanted to have it. Yeah, great, thanks.
Cool. And just to reiterate Jane's point there is, when we go through the training, so when we've got a full accreditation around clinical EFT, the emphasis is always to do your own work. And I would say, particularly if you have come from a religious background and you end up working with people with religious trauma, even if you haven't come from a religious background, but you just have thoughts and feelings about religion, it's really important to do your own work in this area first, because your client will be like so sensitive to any form of coercion or criticism. And so you really have to just be neutral, empathetic, non-directive. The only directive we're giving is for the client to slow down and be safe in their body. I've had clients who have kind of come to me. I'm fairly open about my experience because it's been a big part of my journey. And, so sometimes clients will come and be like, well, what's your agenda with this? What are you trying to achieve through tapping with me? Essentially, what they're asking me is, are you trying to make me reconnect with God, or trying to get me back in religion, or are you trying to take it away from me? Depending on where they're at. There's obviously the spectrum there. And my answer is always, I have no agenda. All I want for you is to feel calm and safe in your body, regardless of what you choose. In EFT, we always do goal setting. So if a client said to me, do you know what, Mitch, I have this profound faith, and I know God and I love God, but there's just all of this stuff that's happened and I'm really struggling, or my church experience or my religious experience was really horrific and it's impacting my relationship to the divine, to God, to whatever, and I'm wanting to recover that. Mwah, chef's kiss, cool. Tell me what gets in the way of that. What are the things that have happened? Let's work on that and see what occurs. If a client says to me, do you know what, Mitch, I had religion forced on me my entire life and I just don't believe it, and it's had a horrific impact on me and it still continues to bother me. I just want to be able to walk away, get on with my own life and not have to think about this stuff anymore, and be at peace with what I believe. Well, fantastic. Tell me what gets in the way of that. I am not your pastor, your priest. I do not want to be. All I want is for you to feel safe. And then I will trust you and your system and your journey for whatever that looks like. So it's really important to not have an agenda either way for what your client's wanting. And to really just be open to, which again, maybe this is my belief that I'm putting on people here, be open to mystery. Cool, what happens when we take the stress response off and we trust the person's system to organically find its next step? And who am I to control that or to determine what that looks like? Cool, just seeing a few things in the chat. Yeah, Sharon?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Mitch, I just thank you, first of all, for really broadening this subject for me. That's been really, really helpful, looking at how impactful trauma in this realm of religion and spirituality can be. I was just wondering, if you've got a brand new client that's not coming to you or is not aware of religious trauma, not aware of yes, Jane, you do. And so yeah, they're not aware of the religious and spiritual trauma that's in their background and how impacted it's been, or they're not acknowledging that impact. And you sort of, because of your experience and because of my understanding of spirituality and its influence on us, I start to become aware, wonder.
Yeah.
One sort of even open up to considering that. Is it just by chasing that sensation in the body and going, okay, well, now let's have a think back to where that started, or
so look,
how you get there?
Yeah.
How do you find it?
Yeah, so I would say it's the same as most things, and kind of what you're indicating there. If we just kind of track our client and stick at their pace, the brain will kind of offer up wherever their distress is kind of originating from. And the brain is amazing. I, in my own tapping process, I'm always so amazed at how deeply religious my brain is. Like I'll be tapping and stuff comes out, and I think, I don't ever remember actually consciously believing this, but I can see how as a young kid I formulated these beliefs. And so I'm not even, like, half the time I'm not even consciously tapping on this topic. I'm tapping on something to do with my business. Um, and then as I'm tapping, something kind of pops up, and I'm like, oh, that's why I can't move forward, because I believe that rich people are going to hell, or whatever, or what is it? It's easier for the rich man to go through the eye of the needle than to enter into heaven. Yeah, and so that kind of pops up. The other thing I would say is in your intakes with clients at the beginning, I think it's just always useful. I genuinely think in the modern world, it's it's useful to ask people and kind of like, do you have a spiritual framework? Do you have a religious framework that you use or that you have come from? And what's your relationship to that topic? Because that can either be a huge
That's a great
resource in,
question.
yeah, because that can either be
Yeah,
a huge resource in therapy. If a client has quite a healthy relationship to spirituality, and they believe that the universe is working for them, or they believe that Jesus or Mary's there looking after them, you can use that as a resource.
yeah,
Or or they go, oh yeah, like, yeah, I came from a really intensely religious background, and but that's not my thing anymore. um cool, I will just flag that potentially something might come up related to
mm,
your religious upbringing. And I think it's also, I think pretty much everyone on here at the moment is Australian, but I know a lot of Americans signed up for the replay. Like, some of us live in a really religious culture where religion plays a huge factor in how we move through the world. Um, and yeah, so I think it pops up, and as long as you're open to discussing it neutrally, I think
yeah.
clients will pick up on that and kind of be willing to share. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
Yes, Swanee?
I'm sorry, I'm in California and I'm
Sweet.
cooking dinner. I'm so sorry, guys.
No, cook. Make yourself at home.
I wanted to thank you first and foremost for this. I truly have enjoyed it. But as you can hear, I do not have an American accent. I
Yeah.
am from Iceland originally, and I moved to
Amazing.
America years ago. But it's funny. What I find is so funny, because we're talking about this, is that some people, depending on their culture too, do not realize if they have had religious trauma.
Mm.
Icelanders, so we have a state religion of, so we are Lutheran. We are born into the Lutheran Church. Our history was, Thor and Odin and the Norse mythology. That's where we come from. So we still have that today. But it's what I find is interesting is that I was talking to my cousin, Icelandic cousin. She went other way, non-dimensional, I think you would call it, right? And has been there for a long time, left the church. And I was talking to her about religious trauma, and she had an epiphany and goes, oh my God, I think I've had that. Because we are so used to being able to just be who we are, under this umbrella of being born into this religion. We leave it if we want to, no problems, right? There's no issue like that. Not religious trauma, not too much. So it's like, it's not in the vocabulary even. That it's like, girl, this was religious trauma you went through. I'm just letting you know,
Yeah.
type of thing. So that's interesting too.
Yeah,
And
100%.
sometimes we have to be aware of that. Sorry, it took so long. So okay.
No, I think
I'm
that's a great point. And this idea of religious trauma is, yeah, keep cooking. Even this idea of religious trauma is pretty emergent. You won't find too many, well, this is probably not the right way to say it, but like, you're not going to look in the DSM and find religious trauma. You'll find a bunch of other strange things, but you won't find this. It's basically trauma, PTSD, complex post-traumatic distress. CPTSD, you know what I'm trying to say. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder. There we go, got it out. In a religious context, or because of exposure to high control religion. And again, I think this is only really emerging because up until recently, one, you didn't talk about religion too much. That was kind of frowned upon. And the general assumption is that religion is mostly good. Again, like that's a very generalized statement, because again, depending on your context and your culture, some religion is good and other religions are bad, or this expression is okay and this is not okay. So yeah, people are kind of only really starting to have this topic as one, more information's been available through social media, different frameworks, different understandings, and all of that. So yeah, a lot of people probably don't even recognize that they've got it. Yeah, cool. We'll keep going. Much better for time than I was anticipating. So apologies that I was probably rushing through at the beginning. So some beliefs that might come up or could be interesting to explore. So again, if your client is more on the spectrum of still having a connection to faith and religion and spirituality, or they're wanting to recover that. Okay, so what are the resources within your faith tradition or your current worldview? Like what is good that remains? So maybe there is a general belief that God is love. Or maybe they genuinely do believe that God is forgiving, merciful, gracious. They see God as the loving parent, the creator. I think some of the research that looked at locus of control said that if people's perceptions or belief around God was that God lives inside them or God is in their heart and their spirit, that those people tended to have more of an internal locus of control, and that God was in them, with them, helping them influence the world. Whereas if your perception or belief around God is an external being that rules from heaven, and that is not closer than your breath or closer than your jugular vein, as I think is a Sufi or Muslim saying, that you are more prone to have an external locus of control. And God acted upon you and you didn't have much resource or agency there. Maybe their resources are outside of the faith tradition. So I have noticed, again, a lot of clients or people in this area tend to turn towards science because they just want something rational and logical that can be proven. And nature is the other big one that I've seen. People kind of turn to nature or nature-based spiritualities because in a way it's less complex. And also just we know that our brains evolved to be in sync with nature. So there's a lot of benefits when you're outside, just hanging out with trees and looking at the sky and being by rivers. And there's a kind of a natural expression of spirituality or humanness that emerges when we're hanging out in nature. Could be their friends, their dog. Maybe they've got a belief in spirit or the universe or the higher self or life or the heart. Maybe those can be their resources. Or maybe their resource is that there simply is no God. Maybe for them that is actually their freedom and their gift. We're just kind of wanting to flesh that out so that we know what could we draw on in the moment or what it is they're wanting to keep. Some things that I have found in my own journey and working with clients to explore, and I think it's useful for us to explore these in general, is the concept of original sin. So how does the client view themselves? Again, there's a spectrum of how this doctrine is taught to people. On the less intense end, it's kind of, here's an explanation for why the world is what it is that sin entered humanity at some point, and there was maybe a fall in consciousness when Adam and Eve ate the apple or the fig or whatever it was. And now we struggle with this thing called sin, but hooray, God forgives us. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is, there's some pretty intense theology and songs out there and teaching around us being wretched, evil, dirty, condemned from birth. And again, like, hearing those teachings later on in life, where you can critique or see what they're pointing to, is a different experience to being raised, being told that you're wretched, sinful, vile, that God hates you, that you deserve to die because of your sin that you had no control over. Like, that's intense for a kid to. So imagine your early imprints being told that the creator of the universe thinks you're this wretched, sinful creature. And in some cases are literally told God hates you because of this. Like, holy dooly. Purity culture. So how does the client view their body? How does their client view their sexuality? If we look at the stats, the sexual activity in the church is pretty much exactly the same as it is outside of the church. I say that to indicate that even though there's a lot of policing and control over beliefs and sexuality and bodies in some high control religions, they're pretty much doing the same thing as everyone else, but then it's going to be coupled with a lot of shame. So people can carry inordinate amounts of shame over really normal, healthy teenage explorations or human relationships. So that can be a big area of tapping as well, particularly if you are working with people who mostly women who are coming from these high control faiths, or if you end up working with the queer community. Again, there's a whole layer of shame and challenge around that. Demons. So this won't apply to everyone, but if you grew up in the kind of hardcore Pentecostal or charismatic type of thing, in some worlds, there's demons everywhere. Demon behind every door. Everything is demonic, and a lot of people have been told that they have demons. And again, rationally, people might be able to reject that, but on a somatic level, how is that showing up in their body? What happens when they think about that? People can have quite intense emotional, sensationary experiences in very high energy church services. And so their bodies are doing stuff whilst they're being taught something, and so that there's a pairing in the body. Or the person had epilepsy, or the person had bipolar, or the person had a very normal human expression and were told that it was demonic. That can do a bit of damage to you. Hell. So do they think they're going to hell? Are they worried about going to hell? Are they worried about others in hell? Again, my experience is that realistically, a lot of people, even in those faiths, don't actually believe in hell, or don't want to. But on a visceral, subconscious level, there's still that fear present. So that can be something worth exploring. And again, like, I think education is also really helpful in this whole area of religious trauma as well, is that church history is fairly broad, and church theology or religious theology. And I know I'm predominantly centering this in Christianity because, one, that's been my experience. Culturally, for us Australians, UK and America, it's kind of been the dominant religion. Obviously, all of this stuff can be transposed into any other religion that we're talking about as well. yeah, there's been multiple understandings of this very topic as well. So education could be helpful here. Again, not telling people what to believe, but okay, well, this person believed this person believed this. There's a spectrum. What do you believe? How do you feel when we talk about this? Pause, let's do some tapping. All beliefs. There's so many beliefs to work through when you've grown up in this. So sometimes it can be specific Bible verses. So for whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has become guilty of it all. Again, I'm not critiquing that verse, but think of someone with scrupulosity, someone with anxiety. Oh God, I sinned. I did one little thing and I've broken it all now, and now I'm just as equally bad. There's obviously, for people from the queer communities, the kind of clobber passages that are referred to. A big one that's come up for a lot of people is this idea is that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So again, this message that, well, you at your core are deeply wicked. You can't trust yourself. Again, I'm not critiquing these particular verses that I've got up here. It's more so, how have those verses been understood and what impact are they having on the body and the brain? Because things can be taught with grace and they can be taught with a lot of condemnation. Wages of sin is death. Again, this idea that people deserve death. The unforgivable sin has been an interesting one to work with. People who have feared that they've committed the unforgivable sin, blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, and therefore they can't be forgiven. It's a bit of a double bind. It's gonna mess with people. I don't know, Swanee, what it's been like for you, but it's been really interesting at the moment. I think you guys just had an eclipse, and there's a lot of talk about the rapture happening. So I think there's a lot of disappointed people over in the States right now who have been left behind.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So again,
a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine many of those people are going to come for a tapping session. But that could be really upsetting for someone. I remember as a kid, I fell asleep, and then I woke up, and everyone in my family had kind of left, and they'd just gone up the street to go and talk, hang out with some neighbors or whatever. And I was old enough that it was fine for me to be left at home. But I woke up, and obviously I didn't know that they were gone or where they'd gone. I remember my little brain freaking out, going, "Oh no, the rapture's happened. I've been left behind. I'm a sinner. I've been left behind." And that was really scary because I'm like, I'm 10. I don't know how to cook for myself or do anything, and God's abandoned me. What am I going to do? Luckily, it was only about 5 minutes before my mum kind of popped back home. I was like, oh, good. She's been left behind too. Someone can still cook and look after me. Again, lots of deserving of death and punishment. Again, just think of what that does to a psyche and to a body. Glorification of suffering. So if horrible things are happening, God's either punishing you or refining you, or testing you. Again, I'm not saying that belief in and of itself is wrong. I think that can be a helpful framework if perceived and felt in certain ways. But also, if you're going through hell and someone's like, God is testing you, or God's just refining you, and you're like, well, I'd much prefer if God was helping me right now because this sucks, or this is the worst thing I've ever gone through, and God's just doing it to test me. Again, that's a really hard thing to sit with and deal with on a pure body-based level. Because again, imagine if I was your loving parent and then I intentionally caused harm to you just because I wanted to test you and I wanted to make your character better. You'd probably want to punch me. And so luckily I am not God. But again, it's like, if we look at these things through a relational lens rather than a theoretical religious idealism lens, it's like, yeah, that even if that was true, that's really hard to deal with. So can we bring relief to the body there? It's wholly righteous to be poor, control over finances, can't question church authority, touch not the Lord's anointed. going to hell if you stray or fall away. So you backsliders is a term that we used to hear a lot. Other religions are inspired by demons. Jesus is the only way to heaven. Again, no comment on those beliefs, but I think what it can do is it can squash healthy curiosity and exploration and wrestling with bigger questions. Or for people who leave the church or leave faith and they want to go and explore, again, on a bodily level and an unconscious level, something reacts because there's still this dominant belief that's held in the body and in the brain that, oh, well, what if I am wrong and these things are demonic and I get overwhelmed and my life falls to poop? Or I don't think I'm allowed to explore this. Anything secular is evil or demonic. I remember being told that Sesame Street was demonic. Pokemon was demonic. What else was demonic? Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. Oh, no, Lord of the Rings got a pass because it was JK. No, not JK Rowling. Who wrote Lord of the Rings? Tolkien. There we go.
Tolkien.
Yep, there we go. It's got there in the end. Secular music was demonic. I remember being this one I found really interesting. Incense was demonic. I was like, do you not know the history of the church? That we love a bit of frankincense. Dream catchers, wind chimes, that was another one I was told was demonic once growing up. We got told by some church people we had wind chimes around the house. We got told that they were demonic. Had to get rid of them. I don't know if anyone else went through the old school CD and book burnings, stuff like that. Again, no comment on what you choose to consume in media-wise, but again, we're looking at the kind of pressure and how that was internalized. Oh, we've still got more beliefs. Sex is dirty and only to be used in marriage for procreation. That's last bit is more so old school Catholic theology. You won't see too many kind of evangelicals that think that marriage is just for procreation. But the general idea of sex is dirty is quite dominant in some religion. If you have sex outside of marriage, you were dirty and no one will want you. Again, I don't know if anyone went to youth group and got the pizza analogy. That God gives you a box of pizza, and every time you have sex with someone or you do something, you give away a slice of your pizza. And then it'll come to your marriage night and you'll have no pizza to give. Generally, it was you can have no pizza to give your husband because they weren't really telling the boys keep it in their pants, and all those stuff. So, or another one I heard was sticky tape. You know, we get given sticky tape to kind of stick us together with our one true beloved partner. And every time you have sex with someone, it's like putting sticky tape on, ripping it off. Essentially, it's all hairy and dirty, and it loses its stick. So you won't be able to have a healthy relationship. Again, I'm not telling anyone what their sexual ethic can be. It's just how are these messages understood and felt and lived, particularly by kids and teenagers who grow up with this. Yeah, it can have an effect. And again, the policing of women's bodies is a big one as well. God doesn't care about your happiness, only your obedience, or God doesn't care about your happiness, just your holiness. You didn't have enough faith to get healed or heal someone. That's been a big one that I've experienced as well, is particularly if people believe in divine healing and they're not healed, or, you know, like experiences where parents or children have died, and people were praying for God to intervene and he didn't. And the pastoral response has been, you didn't have enough faith. Like, oh, I'm now responsible for my child or someone's death because I couldn't have enough faith. Like, imagine carrying that. Women shouldn't speak in church. God has a specific plan for your life and you're responsible to follow it, even though he's not sharing it with you. Or God has a specific plan for your life and I know what it is and I'm going to tell you and you have to follow it. Take up your cross, deny yourself, be crucified with Christ. Again, probably profound teaching in that when understood on a kind of esoteric, mystical, metaphorical level, when it's taught in a way of basically subliminate yourself, punish yourself, eradicate yourself, maybe not so healthy. Spiritual warfare, being attacked by the devil or the enemy. I remember when I was younger, a girl that I knew in my faith tradition was basically experiencing PMS and having quite severe cramps. And she was told that it was a spiritual attack and it was the devil attacking her, and it was the punishment of Eve. Even at that age, when I was still very involved in all this stuff, I was like, I'm not sure that's right. Doubt is sinful, so you can't question. If you do question, or if you do have doubts, it's the devil, and it's not just natural human wandering. Not being a real Christian if you don't speak in tongues or have received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, or you weren't baptized the right way, or you weren't baptized in the right formula. Lots of ins and outs. We live by faith and not by sight. Again, not a horrific thing, but again, when it may have been taught in a way of don't question, don't engage critical thought, believe the impossible when maybe you shouldn't. Basically, spiritual bypassing and dissociation. Whole idea of age of accountability. If you continue to sin after having known Christ, then there is no redemption for your sin. All these things that just can be really distressing for someone. You can literally tap on all of these things that I've listed here. There is specific ways to work with it, which fortunately I can't go through in a 90-minute webinar. And just see what happens, see what shifts occur. So when you are working with these specific beliefs, you're always kind of looking at, so how did these beliefs impact you? So how do they impact your client now? What shows up for them now? Well, it's like, well, I have no belief in myself. Or every time I go to have sex, I go into a freeze response. My body shuts down. Or I feel so much guilt and shame afterwards. Even that's happened with married couples. The messaging around sex was so evil, it's dirty, it's wrong, that when even people who are still in religion then go and have sex, they have this stress response afterwards because it's their subconscious child parts are going, oh, maybe that was wrong and it was dirty. I've even read of a few cases with people with OCD or scrupulosity OCD, religious-based OCD, where they had to like check that they were, what, am I actually married? Is that okay? How does it impact your client now? Anytime my parents talk about religion, I just feel like rage in my body, and I can't be around them. Yeah, well, that's a huge impact. And if we could relieve that suffering, if we could unburden the nervous system there, to borrow a eternal family systems phrase, what a gift to be able to give our clients and to give ourselves and to give others. So also looking at, what do you consciously or rationally believe, and what do you somatically or viscerally believe? So I don't consciously believe in hell anymore, but I have nightmares about it. Or every now and then something pops up into me around, well, what if I am actually going to hell at all after all? I don't consciously believe whatever, but I notice my body is reacting like this. So we want to intervene at that body level through the tapping, which allows the brain to process and update through memory reconsolidation, a whole bunch of other things. So how safe does it feel to question or think something differently? What might happen if they believe differently? Again, a lot of times people will stay in high control, damaging experiences because if I change my thoughts, then I'll be rejected by the tribe, the clan. And we find safety in community, even if it's an unhealthy community. And so there can be a hesitation to question or to believe something different. There can even be a hesitation to believe that actually God's a-okay with you, and that you can have a relationship to divinity outside of institutional religion. It could be whatever. So we're always looking at how do these impact you now, what's showing up in your body, and the other part of it is EFT works really well with specific events. So you kind of want to find an example of when this belief impacted your client. So, if we use the sex thing, well, when was a time that you felt all of that guilt and shame? Now, obviously, we don't need to know the ins and outs and details of the actual event. You can work with EFT without knowing anything about the specific event, but you want a specific moment. Or I want the specific moment that I remember the pastor telling me that I had demons. And so when you think about that event, how does it feel now? And so we're working with how the body and the nervous system is responding now when it recalls those events. Or when you think of, I'll comment into a little bit. So how is it impacting your client now? What shows up in the body now? Common emotions that will come up when you're tapping in this area is self-judgment, confusion, anger, and fear. You can be exploring beliefs about God. So what were you taught about God? What are the key phrases or images or experiences that you associate with this topic of God? You can even tap on the images. You can tap on the phrases. What do you currently believe about this topic? What would you like to believe about God, life, spirit, the universe? What don't you believe about God? That can be a powerful exploration as well, where your client is able to actually name, do you know what? I don't believe this. And I don't believe this. And I don't agree with this. Wow. How does it feel to be able to say that? A lot of times it feels really liberating to be able to say that. And then I've noticed they'll often go, but there's a part of me that's actually starting to freak out that I've actually named those things. Okay, cool. So let's just pause and turn and say hello to this part of you that's freaking out. 0 to 10 right now. How intense is that part of you that's freaking out? It's a 7 out of 10, Mitch. What are you freaking out? It's like, I'm not sure I'm allowed to believe those things. Or I've just got this image of my mother freaking out if I said these things out loud. Okay, cool. So even though I'm not sure I'm allowed to believe these things and I'm freaking out, I can accept myself anyway. Or even though when I say these things out loud, I get this image of my mother's face screaming hysterically, I can accept myself anyway. Then you go through the tapping process and re-rate it. Once it drops to 0, so now that this isn't charged or this isn't activating your nervous system, what's possible? So again, I'm inviting the reframe. Other common emotions, grief over the loss of relationship to God. Again, depending on where your client is, if they had a belief that, there was this being there that was supporting them, that loved them, and now they're at a part in their journey where they just don't believe that, it's almost like they've lost a relationship. Again, consciously, that might not make sense to them, but a part of them is grieving. There can be a lot of anger at God. Why didn't God help me? Why did God allow these people to do this stuff to me? I hate God for this reason. Again, can we meet that? Can we make space for that? Can we be a loving, gracious presence as the client feels these things? It can be a sense of betrayal, and again, more confusion. What is the time? Keep going. So other than working on specific events, so, things that people said, times when I felt let down by God, whatever, they're our specific events that we want to look at. Other things that we can do to kind of move a client along on this religious trauma journey is use this premise of God is a real person. If your client has grown up in a tradition where God is seen as a personal being that interacts with us, or, it's not a religion, it's a relationship, sometimes jokingly referred to as Jesus is my boyfriend theology. where you see these, Jesus is my best friend and we do all of these things together. What we can do is see God as an attachment figure. We can use this premise of, okay, well, if the client grew up believing that God is real and God is interactive and that they should have a relationship to this being, then, and we call in some religions, in some expressions, you call God Father, then God is almost a third cosmic parent, and therefore is an attachment figure. So in the same way, we might do what we call a peace procedure in EFT, which is basically you work on specific events related to a topic. So as we might do it with a literal parent or caregiver, so list all of the painful memories you have associated with your parent. And then as you slowly tap and metabolize all of those different experiences, the client's relationship to their parent or their caregiver shifts. We can do that for God. So what are the things or the memories and associations that you have with God? Where did you feel like this idea of God let you down or didn't show up for you or whatever? So yeah, in what ways do your client feel like God let them down? So there's probably going to be a lot of anger and grief. In what ways is your client cut off or separated from God? So guilt and shame, if they were told that because of certain things they've done, certain ways that they are cut off from God. Even I've noticed clients who have left traditional religion and have developed a more open spirituality, if I could phrase it like that, on a subconscious level, there's still this idea that they're cut off from God, that they don't have full access to it. And again, you look at the mythology, capital M mythology, of a lot of religion, which starts with separation. We are cut off from the divine, and that is a big human experience. So we're just kind of exploring that. What does that mean? How does that show up for you? And you tap on each of those events and just invite the reframe and see what happens. You can also get your client to tap on a Bible. So a lot of people often have some very strong views on the Bible, and even just the presence of one could bring up a lot of feeling. So this isn't a Bible, but I'm just going to pretend it is. So you could get the client to bring in one or have one or to imagine one. And so just when you see the Bible or it's here present, is there any intensity 0 to 10? Yep, that's a 6 out of 10 here, Mitch. And, if you could say the emotion and where it is in your body. I just feel this clenching in my chest, like I'm about to get in trouble. Cool. So I might do, even though just seeing this Bible makes me feel this clenching in my chest, like I'm going to get in trouble, I love and accept myself anyway. Keep tapping until that's down to 0. Potentially I might go, is there any specific memories or verses that stand out to you that bring distress? And again, I can tap through those. Music often has huge emotional ties and anchors. So you could get them to play a particular song that brings up some intensity and tap through that. The idea of entering a church. So sometimes your client might still need to attend a religious service, or there's a part of them that wants to attend to keep the peace with their parents or their family, or there's a comfort in it, or whatever, for whatever reason they want to enter into a religious building, but their body freaks out. You can tap on that so that the client has choice and agency. That I can choose to go, or I can choose not to go, and have peace. That actually it doesn't make me feel unsafe being in that environment. And that even if someone does say something to me that would be triggering, actually it's lost its charge. And I can be there and just be like, yeah, cool, people have their beliefs, but I don't have to take it on. And as I said, tapping on our image of God. Clients will often get stuck with self-blame. Well, it was my fault. I should have left. I was stupid. I shouldn't have believed that. Blaming others. It was my parents' fault. It was the pastor's fault. Again, probably was in a lot of ways, but we can get stuck when parts of us are holding on to, essentially, I want that person to take accountability and to know how much pain they've caused me. We can get stuck because oftentimes that person won't, or doesn't even know, or doesn't care. And so can we move past the blame for our own benefit? Our expectations, sometimes we regress. Again, I've noticed with some clients that when they're calm and regular, it's quite an interesting thing actually. When they're calm and regulated, they kind of get on with life. And then when they become stressed, it's almost like a more rigid part of them comes back online, and they become really religious all of a sudden again. And then once they find, by religious, I mean, they might become more black and white, fundamentalist, ritualistic in their behavior, almost like a compulsion, almost like an obsessive compulsion. And then once the stress is off, they kind of come back into more open, empathetic ways of relating to the world. I noticed it a bit with my young people experiencing homelessness. You could almost, it's a very interesting thing, to me at least, that often when their mental health would get bad, they'd become ultra religious. And my thought process on that, and there's probably studies on this, is that religion provides structure and provides black and white, and it gives me something to hold on to. So when the psyche is kind of going into chaos, we can regress to these very ritualistic. And then also you go into Jungian stuff where you're working with archetypes and psychic archetypes in the energy, in the mind, the unconscious. What I'm not saying, I just want to be clear, is everyone who is very religious is mentally ill. That's not what I'm saying. Again, there's healthy expressions and there's unhealthy expressions. Unhealthy loyalties and secondary gain. Secondary gain is this concept that we keep certain issues because there's a benefit to us. We use parts theories. There's managers who have agendas to keep us safe, and they think keeping us safe is engaging in certain behaviors. Obviously, with EFT, we want to test. So at the end of sessions, we always ask our client, first and foremost, on a scale of 0 to 10, how intense is this issue for you now? Our goal is to get it down between 0 to 2. But then also, so how do you currently feel, or what do you currently believe about yourself, about life, about God? When you say that out loud, what do you notice? How does that feel? Does this feel like it's healthy and that it's life affirming, or do you feel like it's unhealthy, it's kind of destructive? And just tracking with the client and reflecting back to them. Because also in this process, you're wanting the client to build their trust in themselves and their ability to make decisions and interpret. Because in high control religion, that is taken away from them. The heart is deceitful above all else. So you're literally told you cannot trust yourself. You have to have someone else interpret reality for you. Or you have to have us interpret scripture for you and tell you what it means. So you can only trust our interpretation of scripture. Even if they think they're reading it literally, they're still reading it through a lens, because that's what you do when you're human. Getting them to put it in a statement and say it out loud, watching for what we call tail enders, or a lack of congruency between what they say and what the body does. So say they go, yeah, I believe God is totally loving. They might go, yeah, that feels really congruent. Or they might be like, no, there's still something in my stomach clenching. Or maybe they go, it's totally okay for me to not believe in God. And they might go, oh, there's still something in my body that flinched when I said that. Okay, well, that's indicating that there's still something here for us to work with. And asking, okay, well, what's possible from here? If it is true that this is no longer an issue, if it is true that you can believe this, how will things be different for you? You know, maybe it is, do you know what, I can go to my family's, I can go to my family for Christmas and I can rock up to midnight mass to keep them happy and I'll be fine. Or it might be, actually, I feel okay with saying, you guys can go, but it's not for me. and actually I don't want to go. So whatever is true for your client, the most life affirming for them. So this is kind of coming towards the end, and I'm mostly on time. Kudos to me. So obviously this has been a brief overview of religious trauma and clinical EFT and how we can use it. The tap and breathe, even the basic recipe that I showed you before, is stuff that you can begin implementing, I'd say, in your client sessions for the moment. If you don't have previous training in EFT, to stick with the tap and breathe. But there is further training available. So evidence-based EFT, so I'm one of the trainers for that. So we run a full clinical EFT accreditation program online. So it starts with a 3-day foundations program, or the 3-day practitioner program, where we go more into the science of EFT, and we go through various techniques within this framework. And we really teach you how to get specific, how to find the core events, how to work with it slowly or in a trauma-informed way so as to not flood your client, and to really train and teach your client how to do this so that they have a tool as well. And there's a few people on the call today who have already done the training. We then do a 2-day trauma-specific training. So we go more into trauma. Both of them, I would say, are trauma trainings. It's just that the 2-day one is more specifically and explicitly about trauma. And we go through various techniques that you can work with trauma-specific memories. And then you also have the option if you want to do, so you can do those 2 trainings by themselves. You have to do the 3-day training if you want to do the 2-day training, but you can do them as standalone trainings, is probably the words I'm looking for here. If you want to do the accreditation process, then there is a mentoring component to that as well, where you get one-to-one work with one of the trainers, and we help refine your skill as well. The other thing I would say is find a practitioner and experience it for yourself, or find a buddy to practice with. Even if you get the basic skills down pat and you practice with someone, that can go a huge way into integrating that with your clients. Obviously, if you're in the States, your laws are a little bit different to ours about how and when you can integrate this stuff. For the most part, my understanding is that even after the 3-day foundations program, you can begin integrating this into your practice. You just always speak of it as a stress reduction tool. But once you go through the accreditation process, you can get insurance for this technique as well. That's pretty much it from my end. I will allow people to email me questions once you watch this, and I can send out a bit more information. But I just wanted to kind of, again, open up to anyone still on the call who just wants to either ask a question or share what they've experienced with EFT. Yeah, Jane?
I just want to thank you, Mitch, for this. It's been great.
Ah, sweet. Thanks, Jane.
Yeah. And also, this is just by the way, did you record last night?
Yes, so I'll send that one out too.
Because unfortunately, I was planning on being there, but I couldn't get there. So
All
that
good.
would be great. Yeah.
Sweet.
So thanks heaps.
Thanks, Jane.
Mm.
A few things in the chat. Cool. Tracy, any questions or anything that you wanted to share?
No, great training as always. Thanks, Mitch.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys for rocking up so I didn't have to talk at a blank screen. And thank you to anyone who watches the replay. I'll send that out and make that available. And yeah, feel free to ask me any questions. And I can do another one of these if people find it helpful. So peace out, enjoy your life, and go out and do some good work with people. All right, see you, team.